Good evening. It's wonderful to see everybody. This evening, we are going to be having our fireside chat about the Dzogchen masters and the transmission of these Dzogchen masters. We've been working with the book, A Marvelous Garland of Rare Gems, Biographies of Masters of Awareness in the Dzogchen Lineage by Nyingma Khenpo. And last week, 2 weeks ago, we were looking and listening and finding out more about Longchen Rabjam. And today we are going to be, and that was chapter 5. And today we're going to be looking at chapter 2. And chapter 2 has a beautiful heading, The Transmission Through Symbols by Masters of Awareness. So this is how Dzogchen came into our world. The beginnings were in Odiana and near Danakosha Lake. And some of you have heard about Odiana, reading about where Padmasambhava came from. So in Odiana, it was a Buddhist area. It's very recently believed to be the Swat Valley of Pakistan. And that's noted in a number of places. And Swat is a very beautiful area. It's mountainous, it's the Himalayas, it has mountain streams, waterfalls, very lush, and at that time, extremely lush with fruits, vegetables, animals, and also the king and queen were adherents of Buddha Dharma. And we do know that the areas in Pakistan and, of course, Afghanistan were Buddhist. And I believe we all know about the Buddha at Bamiyan in Afghanistan. And so these areas held Buddhism. So the king and queen had a daughter, and she was known as somebody superhuman. And we might call her a great yogi. And she became a fully enlightened nun. And as a fully enlightened nun, she decided to go into retreat. And the place that she went into retreat was either an island or along a beach of a very large body of water, a lake. And it's said that it had golden sand. And her attendant had the name of a Dakini. So she entered deep samadhi, as she was known as a great meditator. She entered deep samadhi, and during her retreat, there was a being of crystal light who came and gave her an empowerment with a crystal vase. And that vase had 5 syllables, and these related to the dakas and dakinis of Buddhism. And these are the dakinis are sky goers and the dakas are their equivalents. So she had an empowerment while she was in deep samadhi. And then, lo and behold, she became pregnant. And she did not know what was happening, but her attendant, who was very wise, as many Buddhist attendants are, advised her that the kind of experience that she had meant that she was carrying what was called a Nirmanakaya Buddha, meaning a Buddha who came into this world to teach us. She gave birth. Her name was Sudharma, the mother, and she gave birth, but she was really embarrassed. So she took the baby and she put the baby in a pile of ashes a little bit away from where she was. But then about 3 days later, she started to think about it and she thought, that's not such a good idea. And she went back to get the baby. And the baby was totally protected, was fine. And then when she picked up the baby, it said that the Dakinis were raining down flowers and blessings and lights. So she brought the baby home and raised the baby. And then when it was a boy, the boy became 7 years old. He said to his mother, "Now I would like to debate the 500 scholars on the king's court." And of course, that was her father. And she thought maybe he was a little young. And she said so. And he said, "No, I'm going to debate." So he went off to his grandfather's court and he found the 500 scholars and he began to debate. And this is Dharma debate. So he's having Dharma debate, and the scholars decide that he's incredible. And they also recognize him as a Nirmanakaya Buddha. And then the king recognizes it as well, and he gives him the name Garab Dorjé. And Garab Dorjé means Vajra of perfect joy. So here we have this immaculate being who is now Vajra of perfect joy. So then when he got his title, he decided to go further up in the mountains in the Swat Valley, and he went into retreat for 32 years. And he stayed in retreat for 32 years. And it is said that during that time, there were some people who did not believe that he was a Nirmanakaya Buddha, and they wanted to harm him. And so they went to look for him, and he came out of his retreat. And it said that when he completed his 32-year retreat, that there was an earthquake. And at that moment that there was an earthquake, there was also a voice that proclaimed that the extremists, which was what they were called, were now believers. It is also said that he performed a miracle that they could see, where he elevated himself and became completely transparent. And that's also why they could not kill him, because he was transparent. This way of becoming transparent, there are beings now who can do this miracle. And these miracles are only done to illuminate and elicit faith. So some people have seen, there is a photograph that was taken in Germany approximately maybe 17, 18, 19 years ago. And it's of Azam Rinpoche becoming transparent. And it's a timed photo. I used to have a copy. And again, this is to bring forth faith. So Garab Dorjé had learned a lot during his retreat. He also began to teach, and then and he taught the Dakinis. And it's said also that when he came into a human form, as he was the first human Dzogchen master, that he was actually an emanation of Vajrasattva, and that it was Vajrasattva who gave the empowerment to his mother, Sudharma. After he had completed his retreat, Vajrasattva gave him the permission to write down the 6,400,000 tantras that was already within his own mind. So he had the mental awareness because he had taught in the God realms before he came into the human realm, and it was all within his mind stream. And Vajrasattva said, "Now you may write it down." So that gave us the 6,400,000 tanchas of Dzogchen, and those are all verses. So when he had completed that, he was going to do more practice in a charnel ground, and that charnel ground was in India. So it is said that he went from Swat Valley, Pakistan, known as Odiyana in the spiritual text, and also Dhanakosha Lake. And he went there on Vishnu's daughter, who was naked. So I have a feeling that that is a dakini, because dakinis can fly within the air. And so he rode on her back to a charnel ground near Bodh Gaya. As you know, Bodh Gaya is where the Buddha was enlightened, and the charnel grounds are very interesting places. So we read a lot about great yogis practicing in charnel grounds. And of course, these are where bodies are cremated. So there are lots of different kinds of spirits. There are pretas there, which means hungry ghosts. There are demons. There are also dakinis. And there's every sort of being. But it's always a challenge that great yogis like to take on. So off he went to the charnel grounds. So I also wrote down what each of the teachers that I'll be speaking about this evening gave us, because it's just amazing that Garab Dorjé came to this world with the teachings that we now have the opportunity to receive. So he, of course, gave the 6,400,000 verses of Dzogchen that was primordially present in his mind, with Vajrasattva giving him the permission to write down those verses. And it's said that the Dakinis of basic space arranged those verses into volumes. So we can also thank the Dakinis of basic space. And of course, basic space is a word associated with Dzogchen. And when he was in the charnel grounds practicing around the same time, there was another scholar, actually, and his name was Mañjushrimitra. Mañjushrimitra was the son of Brahmins, which means that he had a very, very fine education. And his education included Sanskrit, and it included critical thinking, it included astrology, and there were 10 different subjects. I'm gonna get a drink of water. So Mañjushrimitra, and as one can imagine, his name means friend of Manjushri. So Mañjushrimitra was a great student, and he was very well supported by his parents. And one day he was taking a walk and he met Manjushri. And Manjushri said to him, "Oh, if you would like to be fully enlightened in one lifetime, you should go over to the charnel ground." And he named the charnel ground that Garab Dorjé was at and was teaching. And Mañjushrimitra said that he would. And so the name of the charnel ground was Shitavat Shitavana. And so he went over to Shitavana, which was not far from where he was. So we have Garab Dorjé, who was born and raised in Swat Valley, Pakistan. And then we have Mañjushrimitra, who was a student and scholar in India, not far from Bodh Gaya, which is where the Buddha was enlightened. And so when Manjushri said to him, this is what you should do to become fully enlightened, he went for it. And Manjushri is also known as the deity of knowledge, of wisdom, of learning. And when my children were young, I taught them the mantra that all the Tibetan parents teach their children when they take tests. And when they take tests and to help them study, it's Oma Rapatsana Di. And then for fun, or maybe for interest, or maybe as part of it, then everybody says D, 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 D. And children really like that. So Oma Rapatsana Di is the mantra of Manjushri. So Mañjushrimitra goes off to the Chana ground to meet Garab Dorjé, and he stays with him for 75 years. And he studied with him. And then when there was nothing else to teach Manjushri, it is said that Garab Dorjé dissolved into a light, and then that's how he passed. And there's a phrase that will be for each of these teachers that I mentioned. And when he passed, Mañjushrimitra was very close to Garab Dorjé, and he was like, oh no, you've gone, now what do I do? The light is gone, how do I navigate the darkness? So it's said that Garab Dorjé heard him, and then out of the light, out of the sky, right at that moment, he dropped a locket. And it was a jeweled locket, and it was very small. And I'm going to hold up a jeweled locket, but it was even smaller than this locket. And so it said that within that locket was, and some of you may have actually heard of this teaching. It's called the 3 verses hitting the key points. And these are the key points of Dzogchen. So within the locket, this little bitty locket, I don't know if you can see it, within this little bitty locket was the 6,400,000 verses. And there was also the very special training of the 3 verses hitting the key points. And I was really surprised to see that within the text, because I shared my personal story about 10 months ago when we had our first recording on June 6th, I believe. And I talked about when I was at the Portland airport, and there was a famous teacher named Kusum Lingpa who got off a plane at the same gate that I was leaving at, but my plane was very much delayed. And I was invited to lunch with Kusum Lingpa. And it was there that he asked me to come to his retreat that he was going to be teaching. And what he was going to be teaching was the 3 verses hitting the key points. So this teaching is still given, is very much alive. And that's what's amazing about these teachings, is that they came in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and they're beautifully passed on, and they are living teachings. So in the locket that was given to Mañjushrimitra, there were also the Dzogchen Tantras, And they were divided into 3 categories. There was the mind category, which is the abiding state, a Dzogchen phrase. There was the category of the expanse, meaning the state free of anything needing to be done. So nothing more needs to be done. And then there was the category of direct transmission. And this is concerning itself with the key points. And again, these were divided into profound Nyingtig teachings and further summarizing the key points into 2 divisions. One, the explanatory tantra, and the other, the oral tantra. So we have Mañjushrimitra now carrying on the teachings in the charnel ground, and he actually made his way to a different charnel ground after Garab Dorjé passed. And it's said that Mañjushrimitra lived 109 years, which was amazing. Although the area in which Garab Dorjé came from, Swat Valley, which is within the same area, not next to or near, but Hunza, which is known for longevity. So we then, after we have Pakistan, India, we have yet another teacher who is Shri Simha. So simultaneously, Shri Simha is in China. And so Shri Simha was born in China, and he also was a scholar. And at the age of 15, he too started to study. And his studies also included Sanskrit, even though he was in China. And also something which all of them studied, which I find interesting, and it's called valid cognition. And also astrology and other topics. So Shri Simha was walking down the road one day, and who did he meet but Avalokiteshvara? And Avalokiteshvara is also known as Chenrezig, and some, of course, recognize His Holiness the Dalai Lama as Chenrezig. So here's Avalokiteshvara meeting up with Shri Simha, and he says to him, "You have been a scholar for a long time. If you would like to become enlightened in one lifetime, then best go to," it was called Susa Vipa in India, a charnel ground. So this is where Mañjushrimitra was living, and this was west of Bodh Gaya. So it's said that Shri Simha thought, wow, if I'm supposed to go there, I should study even harder. And so for 7 years, he studied the inner and the outer meaning of all of the tantras. And he went to a very famous place, a very holy mountain called Wu Taishan. And Wu Taishan is known for is actually known for Manjushri as his dwelling place, and also for extraordinary teachings that are given there. And I actually got sent this very, very gorgeous, maybe 5 pages of a Tibetan text, which is lapis blue, which is the color of Manjushri, with a gold print, but it's all in Tibetan and Chinese, and I can't read it. And it came with a note that I should hold on to it until one day I would receive the teachings. This happens sometimes where there are texts or there are books that are given, that are offered with the message of not yet reading these. And I remember when I first got the book, Buddha Without Meditation, it was said to keep it on my shelf until I had the lung, which is the reading transmission, to be able to pick it up and read it. So very fortunately, when I was in Tibet, I did get the lung for Buddhahood without meditation. And so then I could pick up the book and read it. So these kinds of things happen. When Shri Simha went to Wu Taishan, he studied the tantras and he mastered them with a very great master there. And he learned the tantras, their explanations, their commentaries, and their pith instructions. And he really wanted to get it right. But Avalokiteshvara came back again and he said, if you want to get enlightened in one lifetime, you need to go to the charnel grounds in India. And so then Shri Simha thought, that's a really far away, because he's in China and this is in India. And if you think traveling now is hard, you can imagine what it was at that time. So what he did was he went into a retreat where he decided he needed to learn the powers of what was called swift walking or swift traveling. And perhaps some of you have heard in the Native American traditions, there were swift walkers and they carried messages. So he took 3 years to learn how to do that. And in Tibet, your feet don't touch the ground. So you are walking, but you're not walking on the ground. You're hovering about a foot above. So he made the journey in 9 days, which is incredible, with the swift walking. And it said that his feet were 1 yard above the ground. And then he went to meet Mañjushrimitra in the charnel grounds called Sosa Vipa. And he circumambulated Mañjushrimitra and he bowed and made offerings and prostrations and asked if he could study with him. And Mañjushrimitra did accept him. And then, because when Mañjushrimitra was in the other charnel ground, he didn't know if he would have any disciples. So he had actually hidden some of the teachings and tantras that Garab Dorjé had given him near Bodh Gaya. So then Mañjushrimitra gave all the teachings to Shri Simha, and in the same way passed away, dissolving into light. And Shri Simha said the same thing that Mañjushrimitra had said to Garab Dorjé, oh no, and oh no. And so then a very similar thing happened where Mañjushrimitra then again dropped the little locket out of the light, out of the sky. And then there was a transmission to Shri Simha called the 6 meditation experiences, plus all of the teachings and the entire transmission from Garab Dorjé to Mañjushrimitra. And also Shri Simha found the hidden tantras that were in a area near Bodh Gaya that had a vajra on it. And so then, interestingly enough, Shri Simha took those tantras back to China. So then Shri Simha went back to China. So far we've talked about 3 different countries. And let's see what else was transmitted to Shri Simha from Mañjushrimitra. Let's see here. So he received the 6 meditative experiences from that little locked jewel. And also he retrieved the texts that were hidden by Manjushri and the other near Bodh Gaya. And he took them back to China, where there was an area where there was a replica of the Bodhi tree. So he took them to a very holy place. And there was a temple called Tashi Trijo. There was a pillar there, and then he put some of the teachings there. And he also brought through the 4 cycles, the inner, the outer, the secret, and the most secret tantric and Dzogchen teachings. And then there's some more that goes with our chapter. And once again, now we can get a little better sense of the locket, right? Because of our title of chapter 2, the transmission through symbols by Masters of Awareness. So we see that the teachings are coming through the symbols, through the lockets, through the wisdom deities. So we're having quite a confluence of wisdom deities pouring their teachings and transmissions into human beings. And we are starting to recognize some of their names from doing the lineage practice when we do the Nunjo. And so the next teachers that we're going to name, because they are part of the transmission chapter, chapter 2. And the next one are 2 friends. And the 2 friends are Vimalamitra and Jana Sutra. And these 2 friends had met in Bodh Gaya, and they used to hike together. One was from the eastern part of India, and the other was from the western part of India. And so they were also students. And then it said that Vajrasattva once again appeared, and he said to both of them, "You both have been scholars for 500 lifetimes. Wouldn't you like to get enlightened in one lifetime? Wouldn't you like to achieve Buddhahood?" And so Vajrasattva sent Janasutra and Vimalamitra to China. And that's where Shri Simha was in yet another charnel ground. And again, remembering charnel grounds are powerful places of practice. In some ways, it's also where one would drop their ego at the door, because it's part of our 4 thoughts, of recollecting on impermanence, on death, and then at the same time, recognition of enlightenment. So they went to Shri Simha, and they asked him to teach them, which he did. And he gave them the whole oral lineage and the tantras. And then Vimalamitra actually returned to India, and Janasutra stayed in China. And then a very similar thing happened where Shri Simha, then having transmitted all of his teachings, then the way he died was to dissolve into light. And then Janasutra cried out, "Oh no, oh no, alas, oh no." And so once again, the jeweled locket. The jeweled locket was dropped from the ray of light, and within that locket came the testament of Shri Simha And let's see what Shri Simha gave to Janasutra, and we'll get to what happened to Vimalamitra. So with Janasutra, then he received the whole testament of Shri Simha and also the 7 linking principles. And he retrieved text from the temple called Tashi Triga. And then he went back to the charnel grounds in India in Bashang. And that's where he re-met Vimalamitra. And so Vimalamitra was told by a Dakini that if he wanted to get enlightened in one lifetime, he should go find Janasutra. And he did in the charnel grounds. And then Janasutra gave him all the teachings that had been passed on through Shri Simha. And once again, he got the locket. And so then Vimalamitra received all of the teachings of Janasutra, also in a locket. And he received an extra teaching called the 4 means of resting. And again, those are Dzogchen instructions. So these teachings were transmitted. They were transmitted verbally, they were transmitted orally, they were written, and they were practiced. And then they were passed on. We're going to work with Vimalamitra a little more because he has a strong lineage, and then also Padmasambhava, who learned from Vimalamitra. So we can see that the beginning of Dzogchen, I think, is quite interesting, that it came in through different countries. And as we're going to talk about, and we have talked about before, Padmasambhava was also from Odiyana, which we've identified as the Swat Valley. And then he is going to, in our future fireside chats, we call these, going to be bringing those teachings into Tibet. So we are going to have the whole Himalayan and Asian region receiving these teachings in very diligent ways. And so they are kept, the Dakinis help to sort them out and to categorize them and to keep them. And these are all available for us, which is, I find, unbelievable. So when they talk about transmission, and when we talk about how teachings are passed on, they have to be passed on in a very pristine way, in a very respectful way, in a very diligent way, because there are many of them, and a lot of what's called the key points need to be explained. And also the transmission, which is the mind-to-mind trainings, are also passed on from teacher to student. So it's a very rare kind of teaching. I mean, we were just so blessed to be able to receive this at such a time, and to know that it has it's not even a history, it's more than history, it's a lineage, it's a held energy, it's a passed on energy, it's a training of the mind, and it's a freedom of the mind. And what each of the deities, Vajrasattva, Vlakteshvara, Manjushri, saying to these disciples, if you want to become enlightened in one lifetime, this is what you do. So that's very different from the what's called the step-by-step approach with, certainly with all honoring of that. Actually, it's said that Garab Dorjé, when he came in within his own mind, he also knew the whole Vinaya, which are all the trainings of the fully ordained monks. He also knew the whole Abhidharma, which was within his mind, and it was the Vinaya, the Abhidharma, and then the sutras. And so he came in with also the fundamental and foundational teachings that we so honor and also need for our and ethical. He came in with the ethical codes. So these qualities of not just the practices, but all of the practices and the maintaining of them and the maintaining of the pristine care of these practices is truly important. And when I was doing my reading, I read and I think about and I digest and then, remember a few things. And, like when I read, oh, Shri Simha was trained at Wu Tai Shan, and I thought, I really want to go to Wu Tai Shan. I've never been there. I know a few people who have, and it's very mystical and magical. And so I thought, how wonderful, that's where he was trained. And then to think that, Garab Dorje came into a Buddhist family, so it was very easy for him to practice. And then the others of Mañjushrimitra, born to a Brahmin family and could practice and have support. And so that these blessed births really also helped to provide a very good foundation for these teachings to be transmitted. So we are very blessed and lucky because this is what we are receiving. So I want to thank you for this part of our program. And now we are going to begin our conversation, which is not recorded, and to see if there's any questions or comments or even reflections. I mean, there's really a lot to digest. I know when I was reading